Now, with that said, let us testify to you of this proof and what this means. And we will use the aid of very reliable resources, such as the archives of Mesopotamia of antiquity, that furnishes historical records to Wikipedia. And we will go to them for some aid for this term, theophoric extension. As many of you may have already asked, what is that? Well, according to that source, the archives of Mesopotamia of antiquity, a theophoric extension is defined as, quote, bearing a deity, a Hebrew or divine celestial name that embeds the name of a god, both invoking and displaying the protection of that deity. Theophoric names were also exceedingly common in the ancient Middle East, as well as in Mesopotamia, where the personal name of an individual included the name of a god in whose care the individual is entrusted. The practice, called in onomestics theophany, refers to this naming convention of aiding a god's name or the local equivalent of the generic term for God to an individual's proper name. Traces of such names are found today in names such as Theodore or Theo God, which means God's gift, or less recognizably as John, literally from the Hebrew Yochanan, meaning, quote, gift of Yahweh, end of quote. End of that definition. Now, that definition explains a little, but it also holds enough water for the subject that we are discussing about the name Micah. Nonetheless, after undergoing such theophoric stripping, that caused the theophoric stripping caused the original Hebrew name for Micah to become altered. And therefore, in results, the name went from 5 Hebraic characters, of which 2 is used twice, making it a total of 7 in position, which are from right to left: Mem, Yud, Kaf, Yud, He, Wav, He. It went from that appearance to the world to, again, from right to left, quote, Mem, Yud, Kaf, Aleph, Lamed, end of quote. That created the English's transliteration of the name, quote, Michael or Mikael, end of quote, with the erroneous abbreviated extension at the end of Micah recognized as, quote, El, end of quote. Again, that was placed on the end of, quote, M-I-C-A-H, Micah, end of quote. Deceivingly done so with a switch of the vowels A and E of Micah. Actually, they took the A from Micah and put it after the H, opposed to in front of the H, and added the EL. Which means what? Well, it means that the extension in question now that we just presented to you, quote, EL, L, end of quote, is the abbreviation or the abbreviated term for the Hebraic word that you resort to the Strong's Concordance under reference H430 from right to left, Aleph, Lamed, He, Yud, Mem, Sophi, pronounced Elohim, Elohim, And this Hebraic word means in English, quote, God, end of quote. That's G-O-D, God. So therefore, and because Yahweh's name is ineffable to all nations of earth, then that caused them to, quote, substitute, end of quote, Yahweh's ineffable name with, quote, Lord, end of quote, again, and God, end of quote, in large and small capital letters, especially when they transliterated the Hebrew prophet scrolls from Hebraic into their English language, which includes Daniel's scrolls. Then they stripped the celestial name, quote, Mika Yahweh, end of quote, and gave us this infamous and world-renowned English name known today as, quote, Michael, end of quote. And that name means, according to them, quote, who is like God, end of quote. But then that leaves a question in the world and in our minds, which is, which God or whose God? Keep in mind that the name Michael doesn't identify God. It just identifies the deity, or it actually identifies Elohim. And all nations make gods of their own, according to 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 29. So whose God is this Michael belonging to? Which is the meaning who is like God, according to Michael. In other words, there never was a Michael. Never was, as the, quote, archangel of Yahweh, end of quote, even of Yahweh ben Yahweh. I repeat, there never was a, quote, Michael, end of quote, as the archangel of Yahweh, even Yahweh ben Yahweh. This also means that, quote, Daniel, end of quote, spelled D-A-N-I-E-L, did not write, where it is found today in Daniel chapter 12 and verse 1, of some great prince named, quote, Michael, end of quote, who is to stand up for the children of his people at the time of the end, which is now. Can you imagine the trick and deception that we were placed in by this wicked devil, this Satan, the devil, and his angels, according to Revelation chapter 12 and verse 9? There are over 4 million men and women in the United States alone today who is carrying the name, quote, Michael, end of quote, as their identity. So imagine how many people are on earth that are worshiping all these many different gods. All the people out of 7.2 billion people that are being recognized by the census of the planet Earth, the population today. That's as of at least September of 2013. The question still remains the same. Now it's being addressed to you. Which Michael are you looking for out of all the Michaels on the planet today? Unless, of course, your mind is so fantasized until you are truly looking for a white man with long blonde hair, wearing a skirt with legs being exposed, some kind of sandals, and a red or white beard, wearing a long white robe. and your mind so fantasized until you are depicting in your mind to be prepared to see a white man with white wings that are attached to the trapezius of his shoulder blades. You know what the trapezius is, don't you? Of the shoulder blade. That's what they show you in pictures, where the wings are attached on the human back. Blowing a trumpet. He should be blowing a trumpet with a sword in his right hand. And when he do so, he'll be announcing to the earth that he is here to kill Satan. Oh, Yahweh. Oh, Father in heaven, please wake my people up. You need to study. Come out of that fantasy. You need to wake up and discover that all prophecies prove and reveals, especially the book of Revelation, chapter 6 and verses 5 and 6, that the archangel, the so-called, quote, archangel of Yahweh, end of quote, that was seen in prophecy by Yochanan as one that sat on a, quote, black horse, end of quote, is a, quote, black man, end of quote. I quote because I want to be quoted in this recorded message and testimony. So everybody, especially of your rulers of this land, can say, come and see. Come and see this same, quote, black man, end of quote, who was prophesied to be born from a womb of a black woman of Judah. And this same, quote, black man, end of quote, will grow to a certain height in measure of cubits, even as he arise to the occasion by taking his stand to be seen by the whole earth, sitting on top of a, quote, black people who are hidden under the same black horse of Revelation chapter 6, verse 5, as an allegory that represents a black nation of people who have the sovereign power that is stored in their genes and chromosomes, end of quote. Quote, end of quote. I am testifying to you, O earth, that this very same, quote, black man, end of quote, is prophesied to arise full of power by the Spirit of Yahweh, and of judgment, and of might, to declare unto those very same, quote, black people, end of quote, their transgression, and to the remnant of those same black people of a separate measure that committed their sin against, quote, Yahweh ben Yahweh, end of quote, while using their, quote, black power, end of quote, in judicial murder in U.S. courts. And still, according to Genesis chapter 15, verse 13, the one that will stand for the children of thy people, of Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, will appear as a stranger to Judah and to the whole world, even as he arise in a, quote, strange land, end of quote, when he wake up, where he and Judah was, quote, sealed, end of quote, after being written in the book, just as it reads in Daniel chapter 12 and verse 1, as quoted, quote, and at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book, end of quote. So it is to this very day that the people are sealed that were written in the book. That a certain man that carries a certain name that bears the two Hebrew characters Sin Resh, pronounced Ser. That's S-A-R spelled in English, pronounced in Hebrew Ser. That was created from two Hebrew characters, again, from right to left, Sin Resh. He carries it in his name, which is the Hebrew idiom for the English's noun, quote, prince, end of quote. One man that would be the only man on earth that will fulfill the three Hebrew characters referenced in your Strong's Concordance, number H5975, from right to left, the Hebrew characters Ayin, Mem, Dalet, pronounced Ahmad, Ahmad, spelled in English A-M-A-D. That is often used in Hebraic to announce a new prince. Look it up in your Strong's Concordance. Reference H5975, that is found in the book of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 1, which is also the Hebrew idiom for the English's term, quote, to stand up, to arise, and to rise up against anyone in war, especially to remain amongst the living, end of quote. This description and meaning of this Hebraic word, Ahmad, that was written by Daniel originally, is said to describe only one man that is called by the celestial name that bears the meaning, quote, who is like Yahweh,